Sheri Hawk was born with intuitive gifts and had psychic experiences since childhood. Throughout her teens and 20s, she frequently found herself having visions of things that would come to fruition. As the years progressed, she recognized the profound contribution her gifts would bring to people's lives, especially in her law enforcement career. As a police officer, she was frequently spiritually guided while on patrol through a series of psychic events.
Well, sometimes it's just a whisper, and other times it can be somebody blurting something out, video images, like snapshots, smells, sounds, emotions, energy going through me. Sometimes the energy is so strong when it goes through my right arm and hand, it kicks it up, and luckily it doesn't hurt at all, but it looks really weird. Sometimes they come in, unrequested, especially like around water. The energy really flows a lot around water, like in the pool, by the ocean, even in the shower. Suddenly somebody, my spirit guides or somebody else's sometimes, will pop in and just start talking. Oftentimes when I'm communicating with a deceased loved one, I will feel a rush of their emotions, their love, their energy, their excitement and joy of being able to have an opportunity to speak with their loved ones and answer questions and help with that healing of words that weren't said in time, or words that never got a chance to be spoken maybe in years, that they can share that communication. It's a beautiful feeling.
She did not always want to be a police officer. After spending several years in business management, she began to feel drawn to public service, specifically family social welfare.
After some time of shadowing a social welfare department supervisor, I witnessed firsthand the destruction of the families with this unending cycle of violence. And I realized that being a social worker and coming in to help after the violence wasn't enough. I needed to do something to protect the children. So I knew that my calling was to do more, to come in and be a person who helps protect and prevent the violence that was destroying these families, this cycle of violence. So I decided to try and get into law enforcement. And at that time in the 80s, it was a male-dominated career field, and it was very difficult to even get in, especially if you wanted to be more than a meter maid.
After 6 years of her quest to become a police officer, Sheri's dream became a reality when she was hired by her police department of choice, working as a patrol officer. She always patrolled alone, so her spirit guide served as a supportive partner riding along next to her.
You could say that Spirit rode shotgun with me, because even though I was alone, I always felt like I had a partner with me. And I think they really, really enjoyed the pursuits, because not the lights and siren, but we'd get, energy would get keyed up, but you still had to stop when you went to an intersection if you had red to protect, the oncoming traffic. So oftentimes the person you were pursuing, they'd be out of sight. You'd lose them in the pursuit. So then Spirit would say, oh, turn this way, turn that way. Oh, I think they went that way. And more times than not, Spirit would lead me directly to the bad guy. Also, Spirit was really helpful with investigations and suspect interviews. They'd be lying about what was going on, and Spirit was like an instant lie detector, because they'd signal me the minute the person started lying. And then they'd start showing me a little video in my head of their exact details of their crime. So I'd say, wait a minute, I think that this happened like this, and then you did this, and the suspect's jaw would just drop open, because I was literally showing them exactly what they did. And it was great because it led to a lot of closed cases and confessions.
The partnership with Sheri and her spirit guides would prove to be paramount when facing dangerous situations.
I remember back when I was a rookie, Spirit really helped save the life of a veteran officer who begrudgingly came to back me up. I was doing a felony warrant arrest at a sleazy, criminal-infested motel, and it was so old, on the second story they still had the old iron railings that come off. So we approached it. I stood in a defensive stance off to the side of the hotel door, And the veteran officer stood directly in front of it and started knocking on the door. And all of a sudden, Spirit said, "He's going to throw him over the balcony." Sure enough, the door flew open and the suspect comes out and he goes, "You're going over," and lunges toward the veteran officer. And as he did that, it was like some kind of fight scene from a movie. I grabbed his arm, spun him around, pinned him against the wall, and started to handcuff him. Meanwhile, the veteran officer just standing there in shock. And that is the absolute truth.
The psychic alert had prevented what could have been a life-threatening altercation for Sheri and her backup, and it was the beginning of understanding how her psychic gifts could guide her to protect and serve. She continued to receive urgent warnings and guidance, video imagery, and even connecting with the deceased on police calls. Her most meaningful use of her psychic communication was in comforting distraught families.
Definitely the DOA, or deceased person runs, was where I felt my gift enabled me to have the most impact with the families. Officers hated these runs because you had to stay there the entire time filling out the death report and waiting for the coroner to release the body. So I would use that time, because I often volunteered and took the run from other people, to try and help the family. And Spirit would tell me what to say, what they needed to help them and ease their suffering and their pain, because this was likely the worst day of their entire life. So while I was filling out the report and talking with them and trying to comfort them, oftentimes it would happen where the deceased person's soul was still there and they would realize that I could talk with them. So they would start dictating all these messages and stuff. So I would say to, for instance, the wife, I'd say, "Well, I think he would have said this or he would have said that," and I'd start passing it on, but in a careful way so the family didn't know I was actually speaking with the deceased person next to me. And then she'd say, "Oh my God, that's exactly what he always said." And then I'd hear the Spirit give this little chuckle, and then he'd go on saying whatever the rest of his message was. But it really helped them in that moment to know not only what to say, but to be able to deliver their words of love to them.
Sheri's investigative skills and psychic gifts became more integrated as her law enforcement career progressed over the years. Eventually, she began consulting for police agencies with serial rapists, robbery, missing, and murder cases. Sheri now dedicates her time and psychic gifts to assisting families and investigators with critical missing persons cases.
I believe that missing person and missing person murder cases are now the most important use of my gift. Being able to help the police locate and return home a missing person is great. It's wonderful for the family. But recovering a missing murder victim so you can return them to their family so they can have the funeral and they don't have all these unanswered questions, that is really very helpful in their grieving process and helping them to move on with their life.
Most of us will never know the horror of violent crime, but for an unfortunate few, it is very much a reality, and its effects can ripple for generations, leaving families devastated and struggling with unanswered questions. But the truth can sometimes still be heard in the most unlikely of places, the victim themselves.
My mission is to make that voice heard. My name is Sheri Hawk. I'm a retired police officer and a psychic medium, and these are my stories.
This case began on November 13, 2011, in an Ohio small rural township sharing the Indiana border. A missing persons report was filed with the county sheriff's department by an elderly woman who reported that her 22-year-old grandson, who lived with and cared for her, had disappeared. Her grandson, we'll identify as Jim Smith, had been out of contact with his grandmother since November 4th, 9 days prior.
When I retired from law enforcement in 2010, I kept in touch with the detectives and investigators that I had previously known and worked cases with. And I told them it's okay to share my personal contact information with other agencies, but never the media. When this case came to me, I'd never heard of Jim Smith.
Sheriff detectives had interviewed several people at Jim Smith's workplace, his hangouts, and his close friends about his disappearance. After weeks of gathering information, nothing new was found, and the case went cold.
About 2 months after Jim Smith's disappearance, a detective I worked with before reached out to me for help. The detective told me that Jim Smith and his friends had a criminal history involving thefts and drugs, and he suspected foul play, but he didn't have any leads to follow up on, and the case was going cold. The detective was also concerned because his elderly grandmother was really suffering and upset with his disappearance.
After speaking with the detective, Sheri agreed to connect with her spirit guides to see what may have happened to Jim Smith.
I agreed to help the detective with the case, and after I got done speaking with him, I went into a prayerful meditation and then began receiving a barrage of images and sounds and scenes and locations from spirit. First, they showed me train tracks in a wooded area near a creek. Then eventually the train tracks crossed a roadway, and looking down the roadway you could see a large highway sign. And then all of a sudden there was a blast of a train whistle and then all this highway traffic. Then I left the roadway and was brought indoors. I didn't know where I was. There were men laughing and drinking, and I was as if I was standing right there amongst them. It looked like some kind of dive bar or somebody who tried to make their basement look like a bar. Then Spirit showed me a headstone in a cemetery. So I asked, "Is Jim Smith dead?" And they replied, "Yes." Then Spirit showed me a gruesome image of a man with brown hair with a bloody face and head trauma. And then there was this loud bang. Now it didn't stop there. Then they showed me another awful image of a man with a red shirt on, blue jeans, and brown work boots being dragged across the ground. Then I heard 2 train whistle blasts. And then they showed me a weathered wooden sign that was nailed to a post in an overgrown wooded area.
After several hours of receiving psychic imagery and startling sounds from her spirit guides that included confirmation of Jim Smith's death, Sheri began her mediumship process of connecting with the victim directly.
I felt a severely angry energy force shot through me, and then he yelled,
"Those fuckers! Those fuckers!"
He wasn't just shouting. His energy was erupting in shock.
I can't believe they did that! Those fuckers!
Well, the anger, confusion, and frustration was that of his earthbound soul.
I want to go home! My grandma's sick! I'm stuck in between.
He needed his body to be found so his soul could go into his heaven realm. He wanted to come back and watch over his grandmother.
Understanding the victim's urgency for the location and recovery of his body, Sheri asked Jim to show her the faces of anyone involved in his murder. Confirming the detective's suspicions, she was psychically shown the faces of 2 men.
When I saw their faces, I immediately flashed back to the dive bar where I saw the men drinking, and those 2 were there. The first one was a male with light brown hair, and he had a weaker energy, like a follower's energy. The second man had dark brown hair, and it was messy, and then he had a scruffy goatee. His energy was totally different. It was very aggressive and in charge, very strong energy from him. And once again, the train whistle blew.
By late afternoon, Sheri had enough information to share her findings with the sheriff's detective. First, she described the area that would need to be searched for Jim's body. When she further described the dive bar scene, the detective advised that she was describing the basement of the grandmother's home where Jim Smith lived.
I described to the detective the bloody head trauma that I saw and the loud bang. Then I told him about the body being dragged across the ground and the description of the clothing. When he heard that, he said, "Oh, you're giving me chills." That's what he was wearing the last time the grandmother saw him. And then he emailed me Jim's picture and the mugshots of two persons of interest. Seeing the actual photo of Jim for the first time triggered the imagery of that bloody trauma that I had seen. When I saw the first mugshot of one of the persons of interest, it looked just like the face that I had seen, the light brown-haired man who had the follower's energy. To confirm with my spirit guides, I placed my hand over his photograph, and I got that jolt of energy that was my signal that they were confirming this person is involved in this situation. The face of the second mugshot did not match my vision at all. He didn't have the dark, messy hair or the scruffy goatee. He did have a stronger energy than the follower, but it was more deceptive rather than the angry, aggressive, in charge one. At the very least, I felt that they were both involved and had knowledge of exactly what happened.
Sheri emailed her mugshot findings to the detective, pointing out which of the two suspects was the weak link. She stated that the man who had the follower energy would crack under interrogation. She further informed the detective that there were multiple people with knowledge of Jim Smith's murder.
What we needed now was to find Jim's body. On occasion, Spirit will show me exactly where an object I'm looking for is located. But it's very rare for a deceased soul that I'm channeling to know precisely where their body is. I'll see the type of terrain such as a field, a lake, a building, wooded area. More often than not, Spirit will guide me to a specific location. And then when I'm there, they'll send me surges of energy, confirming that I'm picking up on the clues and messages that they're trying to give me. As Spirit is signaling to me that I'm recognizing the clues, what they're really doing is showing me a mirror image of an area to be searched, a mirror image of where a body recovery would be. This is vital to helping the police narrow down the search area and focus their attention in this area, because I may be thousands of miles away from the crime scene.
At the detective's request to search as a team, Sheri met him at the location Spirit guided her to. She reiterated the images in her vision as they parked along the roadway where the railroad tracks crossed, noticing the surrounding wooded area and creek that ran under the railroad trestle.
Just down the road, you could see the large highway exit sign. So we carefully trekked through the snow down the hill to the creek underneath the railroad tracks. I explained to the detective, while I wish I was taking him directly to the body, the environment, the area that I was having him look at was going to be a mirror image of where Jim's body would be recovered. I kept thinking about Jim's disbelief that they did this to him. It sure felt personal, and that the killer was definitely known to him.
On the evening of March 21st, 2011, a man was hunting in a wooded area just off the highway. The hunter discovered a body in a creek bed next to railroad tracks about a mile away from the location that Sheri walked with the detective. The scene was truly a mirror image. When the county coroner completed the examination of the body, he confirmed it was the missing young man, Jim Smith.
On May 12th, 2011, the sheriff's detective arrested one of Jim's friends. We'll call Mike. When I saw Mike's photo, I was stunned because he had the same messy hair and scruffy goatee and that aggressive, angry energy that was in my vision. Mike confessed that he shot Jim in his face. Then he put a garbage bag over his head, loaded him into the trunk of his car, and drove him to a wooded area. Mike dragged the body away from the train tracks and down into a creek bed. He then removed Jim's clothes, covered him with some tree brush, and left. Removing the clothes made the body harder to see, and it also would speed up the decomposition of the body.